policy. It's personal. I stood next to President Obama as the Marines carried those flag-draped caskets off the plane at Andrews. I put my arms around the mothers and fathers, the sisters and brothers, the sons and daughters, and the wives left alone to raise their children.
Well, the Republicans were not appeased about that, so Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin started the questioning on Benghazi in what produced one of the biggest flare-ups of the day.
We were misled that there were supposedly protests and then something sprang out of that, an assault sprang out of that. And that was easily ascertained that was not the fact. And the American people could have known that within days, and they didn't know that.
With all due respect, the fact is we had 4 dead Americans. Was it because of a protest, or was it because of guys out for a walk one night who decided they'd go kill some Americans? What difference at this point does it make? It is our job to figure out what happened and do everything we can to prevent it from ever happening again, Senator.
The Republicans saw that and said, yeah, so what? I'm going to keep going. So here comes Senator Rand Paul.
One of the things that disappointed me most about the original 9/11 was no one was fired. We spent trillions of dollars, but there were a lot of human errors. These are judgment errors, and the people who make judgment errors need to be replaced, fired, and no longer in a position of making these judgment calls. I'm glad that you're accepting responsibility. I think that ultimately with your leaving, you accept the culpability for the worst tragedy since 9/11, and I really mean that. Had I been president at the time, and I found that you did not read the cables from Benghazi, you did not read the cables from Ambassador Stevens, I would have relieved you of your post.
Oh, ooh, okay, Senator Rand Paul. Well, when you're president, you can act that way. Look, I've got mixed feelings about this Benghazi situation. We're going to discuss it in a second. But these guys are like, oh, yeah, boy, after 9/11, we would have taken people to task. Really? Which Republicans took the Bush administration to task after 9/11? What happened to George Tenet? What happened to the guy who didn't read the memos? By the way, that guy's name was George W. Bush. What would you have done with him, Rand Paul? There's a lot of hypocrisy going on Washington, which I'm sure you're not surprised by. All right, let me bring in a couple experts here. Michael Hastings is not only a writer for Rolling Stone and BuzzFeed, but the author of Panic 2012, the sublime and terrifying inside story of Obama's final campaign. He's also a correspondent here for the Young Turks. And, of course, Lindsay Moran, former clandestine officer for the CIA, which sounds awesome. Her book is Blowing My Cover, My Life as a CIA Spy. Great to have both of you guys here. Let me start with you, Michael. Were you surprised at the severity of the Republicans' response to Hillary Clinton?
No, they've dug into this issue as almost like truthers into 9/11. They decided that this was going to be an issue that they were going to ride as far as they could. They already got one scalp with Susan Rice, preventing her from becoming Secretary of State, and clearly they were trying to tarnish Secretary Clinton's image. You know, I think that first question that Secretary Clinton we just heard was asked by the senator, you know, that was off base. Clinton is right. Whether it was a spontaneous demonstration or a planned attack or some sort of combination of both, which is from my understanding that is the case, is fairly irrelevant. That's the wrong question. Rand Paul has a perfectly valid question, right? Which is you have this very sensitive outpost in your premier foreign policy initiative, which is the intervention in Libya, and they're asking for more security at the rebel HQ outpost there. So somebody should have been reading the cables. And if Secretary Clinton didn't think Libya was important enough to be that involved, well, that's worth knowing. But in the end, I think whenever you have a situation where these guys are obsessing over these questions that most people don't really care about, and you see Secretary Clinton does very well handling this, so I think she came across quite well.
Lindsay, let me go to that central question that Michael brings up. So how much security is there normally at an embassy and a consulate, et cetera? Are they all really well secured, and this was the only one that wasn't secured? And so I don't know the proper context, and that's why I think that's really important for you to tell us.
Well, they should all be very well secured, and the security situation in Libya, I think, is deplorable that they didn't have adequate security there. You know, back when I was serving in the Balkans in the late 90s, all of our embassies and installations, we had Marines all over the place. We had tons of security. We all got danger pay. That was a much less hostile situation, although it was an unstable situation, nothing compared to Libya, and not the same kind of anti-American rancor on the ground. So, yeah, it should have been much more secure, and I think it's deplorable, and I do think that the survivors of the victims and the American public deserve an explanation as to how that turned into such a security debacle, and frankly, our embassies require better security. That costs money, though, and I think that's something, you know, it would be curious to ask the Republicans if they're willing to put up the money for that.
Well, we actually know that answer already. They cut that specific budget, so I guess the answer is no. They're not willing to put up the security, but if security goes wrong, they are willing to blame the opposing party. I know that comes as a huge shock to everybody. But let's talk about, you know, who dropped the ball here. I am very curious about that. It goes to the substance of what we're discussing here. Michael, what do you think went wrong here? Who should have acted and didn't?
Well, what I wanted, the testimony I would have wanted to see was General David Petraeus, who was head of the CIA. And as we know, there was a very substantial, over 20 CIA officers and security personnel in Benghazi. So my question is, what was the involvement there, and how much were the State Department's hands tied, or how much, and especially or the White House's response to the tragedy, kind of how much of their hands tied because of the fact that there was this very secret presence? Right, because look, it's funny. The GOP senators are accusing the State Department of lying and part of this big cover-up. You know, when they're not actually mentioning, well, there is an obfuscation of the truth, and that is we have a heavy secret presence there that we wanted to keep secret, and it wasn't because of this operation. But I think someone in the State Department who didn't respond to the request for security should be taken to task.
So what in the world was going on there? Let me ask both of you. Lindsay, let me start with you. Why was there such a heavy CIA presence there? Were they keeping that as some sort of... I don't know what they were doing there. Do you have a better sense of it?
Well, there should be a big CIA presence in a place like Libya. I think the larger and more important question, though, is, you know, all the blame is sort of being laid at the feet of the State Department. When the CIA is the entity, they're the ones who are supposed to know the security situation on the ground. They're the ones who are supposed to predict something like this happening. And, you know, I take Susan Rice at her word that she was working with the best available information given to her by the intelligence community. The CIA, notwithstanding recent successes in taking out Osama bin Laden and al-Qaeda leadership, I mean, let's not forget, this is the same organization that failed to predict the dissolution of the Soviet Union, that failed to predict Arab Spring, more recently that failed to predict that half of Mali would fall to Islamists. So we're kind of taking for granted that the agency had sources on the ground and had adequate information there, and it appears that they didn't.
Yeah, but there was something else going on at that consulate. Michael, do you know what it was? What was the CIA doing there?
Well, I think there are two things. I think they're overlooking the different militia groups that we supported in the intervention with Libya. There was something that Paula Broadwell, General Petraeus's friend, said that there was a secret prison there that the CIA was helping to run. That was later denied. I have heard reports that they're involved in arming different groups and doing little gun running there. So there's a lot that could have been going on that probably was going on. And in terms of the question of this, whether it was a riot or a spontaneous protest, I did pretty extensive reporting about this. And what happened was the CIA station chief in Tripoli wrote a cable back the night after, literally, I think the night after the attack, saying this was a pre-planned attack. He was overruled by the so-called IC or intelligence community within Washington, and that was a gentleman who overruled him was John Brennan. In fact, was the one who came up with the recommendation that it wasn't a spontaneous attack, but there was this sort of
great. Let's fire John Brennan. Yeah. Agreed. Deal.
Well.
And by the way, so where's John Brennan going? Head of the CIA. I mean, why isn't he in front of them? Because he's the one who apparently made it political based on that reporting.
Right. And it might not even have been political. Like, Brennan is dealing with, there are 16, 17 intelligence agencies. He's trying to make the best estimate. He overrules the station chief. They're seeing other feeds. So I think blaming Secretary Clinton for that, it was very strange. Literally, Rice was just going off the talking point she was given. I mean, there was no cover-up there or intent to deceive.
All right, one last thing, guys. I want to talk about the politics of this for a second. Jeff Duncan is a Republican congressman of South Carolina. Here's what he said.
You let the consulate become a death trap, and that's national security malpractice. You've said you take responsibility. What does responsibility mean, Madam Secretary? You're still in your job, and there are 4 people at the Department of State that have culpability in this that are still in their jobs. This was gross negligence. At what point in time can our administration and can our government fire someone whose gross negligence left 4 Americans dead in Benghazi? What does the word responsibility mean to you, Madam Secretary?
I believe this is called grandstanding in politics, and by the way, fundraising too. That's exactly what's happening here. But real quick, guys, who is damaged more by this, Hillary Clinton or the Republicans?
I think Clinton escapes fine. I think putting off this testimony to after the election, she's on her way out. She was able to get a lot of love from a lot of the Democrats there. I think she goes off and isn't too scathed by this. But it will be brought up again and again and again and again by the right, that's for sure.
Lindsay, quick thought?
Well, it's kind of playing politics with this tragedy. And, I think Hillary Clinton gave great testimony today and defended her position. And in her defense, George Tenet, who was at the helm during the worst intelligence failure of our time, and then led us into Iraq with faulty intelligence. Nothing like he never had this kind of grilling. He got a Presidential Medal of Freedom in 2004. So
I remember when the Republicans were outraged about that. No, I don't, because that never happened. Right. All right,
That's
Lindsay
it.
Moran and Michael Hastings, you guys are great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks.
Thanks.